Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Thursday afternoon, so hopefully everybody had enough time to get their questions in, so let's jump in and see what we got. Starting us out on Floatplane, another Hugh wanted to follow up with the CRT discussion from last week where they were having what appeared to be sync issues, and it turns out that that series of CRTs has some compatibility issues, and I've definitely heard of that before, so that makes sense. And they ended up getting the transcoder, and we're pleased to say it works great and doesn't add any significant lag. Transcoders won't, to the point where I believe you could even still use light guns with them and all of that stuff. Same thing with the RGB to S-video conversion circuits and stuff like that. So it's very cool that you got all of that sorted out. And I'm glad that you found a transcoder that worked, because transcoders and some DACs they're definitely not all the same. And even if you have transcoders using the same basic chips and datasheet circuits, there's a lot more that goes into it. I talked about it last week, so I won't repeat myself too much, but getting the correct transcoder or finding a cheap one and just happen to have it work in your scenario is a good thing. So I'm glad you got yourself sorted out. And yeah, some CRTs could be a pain, but I'm just glad your setup's all working now. Now, moving over to Patreon, Danny Funker's back with some Video 8 VHS capture questions. First, they got a little frustrated with the TINC 4K and the lines problem they were seeing. They know I recommended to disable 3D comb filtering, but they didn't realize that they needed the newest experimental firmware to do that. I don't think you do, but I forgot last week, you might have had to have plugged in a composite video source, turned off 3D comb filtering, saved that profile and enabled it S-video or something and done it that way. But I'm glad to know Mike added the option to do that even with an S-video source connected. However, my gut is telling me the lines problem is something else. So I'm really curious to see how you make out with that using different solutions. Continuing on with Danny's questions, they're going to redigitize everything with Domesday. Ooh, I hope you have a lot of free time, but let me continue. As a non-electrical person, they found a no solder solution for the project, picked up a Sony player locally and sourced all of the required equipment from AliExpress and Amazon. And they also found a camcorder that they're going to do the same basic stuff. Since all of this seems pretty complicated for the average person, they were thinking of making a couple of YouTube videos on it. They're using the CX card and haven't seen anybody yet do a video on it. They do have a lot of Linux experience. That's a key thing right here. And they were able to get everything up and running and was thinking about putting together a few videos on it. The Domesday method looks really good. They transferred about 1 minute of a professionally released film and it looked almost DVD quality. They can't get over how amazing this looks. 2 questions. Is there anything they could do to make it easy to perform color corrections on the video after they've captured? Their videos are all NTSC. Yeah, DaVinci Resolve and the color profiles. And I know it's confusing and complicated, but if you're a Linux person, Linux is way more complicated than DaVinci Resolve. And look up EposVox's channels. The Stream Professor has you covered with tons of different things. You could add different lookup tables, and there's a lot of things you could use DaVinci Resolve to do color correction for. So no problem there. Next, is VHS a good enough option? Or for VHS, is a good enough option for capturing sound just hooking up a second traditional capture method and then syncing up the RF, meaning the Domesday captured videos, with something like Adobe Premiere doable? Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think if you just do something like that, or even just simply use one of those crappy USB capture cards, or even the decent one that I saw, the $50 solution that I'm going to be including in a couple of videos, that will work really well. And you only really need to worry about syncing the first couple of seconds of audio and video. So even if it all drifts out of sync within 10 minutes, as long as you have that first minute where there's audio playing and something on screen, you could kind of sync that, or I guess even just audio playing. You could sync it up with Domesday. No, yeah, it would have to be audio playing and something on screen at the same time. But still, you could probably sync it up to the point where it would be fine after the fact. And that, I believe, is what the Domesday people are doing. But I do have a couple of things to add. First of all, it is my opinion that doing direct capture to 480i using a good method with a time-based corrector and a comb filter, which you might be able to use the RetroTINC 4K to do. I'm going to be testing that, and if so, I'll have a video on it within a month or two. But doing that and then using software to scale, I love Bravicon still. If you use that to scale the 480i image to 4K, I don't think you're going to notice a massive difference for home videos as you would using Domesday. Domesday is way more complicated. Everything has to be done through the command line, where if you're a Linux person, that's not a problem. But I grew up in an era where there was no GUI. I've earned the right to not use a command line anymore, and I don't want to. I'm going to be a pain in the ass about that. I'm going to annoy the Domesday team until they come up with GUIs for everybody. If Simon, the BravoCon creator, wasn't so busy, he probably would do it for them. But that's an important thing for me, because this stuff's supposed to be much easier. You shouldn't have to have a sysadmin Linux degree to go through and do all this stuff. So that's it. It also takes forever, which is a good thing because it's processing it, but taking your raw capture takes forever to get it to 480i. And then you still need to scale it. And I still suggest BravoCon. I'm going to have a whole video on this. The script's written. I just got to find the time to do it. Life's crazier than usual this past month, but hopefully by the end of August, definitely. But I'm aiming for the end of July to release that. So it's my opinion that if you do a direct capture solution and you scale it using BravoCon versus for home videos using Domesday, and then to get it to 480i and then scaling, I don't know if you're going to be able to tell a difference. On the flip side, if you grabbed one of those little boxes off of Amazon, the one that I showed that was $150, the time-based correction works. If you compared that to direct capture with then scale with BravoCon, you could notice immediately. The crappiest TV from 5 feet away, you don't even need side by side. You play 10 seconds of this, you switch over to the other, you're going to know instantly which one's better. I'm really almost positive that that's not going to be the case with Domesday. Also, for anybody else listening, there's another solution for VHS coming out that's supposedly going to get audio as well. So you don't even have to worry about all of this extra stuff. So I personally would recommend everybody, unless you already have bought the hardware, I would recommend everybody hold off on Domesday for a little while longer for VHS. And also, my favorite feature, and I think one of the most important features of Domesday, is that you could take multiple sources. So let's say not home videos, but let's say you found a VHS tape where all of the original files and film are gone. So the only thing left on the planet of this work is whatever VHS tapes are out there. You could have 10 people each rip their own copy, or if you're lucky enough to find 10 new old stocks, do all of them. You run them through Domesday, and then you have that software check out each one and pick the best bits of each. So you could essentially end up with better than you would ever possibly get from one VHS rip, which is impossible with home videos where you only have the original copy. So I'm not crapping on the project. I love it so much. I interviewed him twice, and I'm going to probably do a whole video on it by the end of the year. I just really want to be clear where its strengths are. And if the newer version of it gets to the point where you could throw in a tape, you hit record on your PC, when you're done, you pull up a GUI and you select your options, and then you leave it overnight, you come back, and then you fire up BravoCon, you select your options, you come back 3 hours later. If it's at that point, that's going to be amazing for people who really have important stuff that they want to get the highest quality possible. But your average person's still going to grab a Tink 5X or a Tink 4K, plug in their VCR, hit record, and when they're done, there's their HD or 4K file, and it's going to be better than anything you'll find on Amazon. And the only thing that's going to beat it is direct capture, which you could still do through the Tinks, video coming soon, or Domesday. So I'm 100% with you on everything you're doing, but since this is a public discussion, I had to over-explain because I don't want people who are listening to get the wrong impression. But let us know, and I'm also curious if you wouldn't mind following up. With Domesday, do you still get the lines that you got on the Tink 5X? I mean, the Tink 4K? Because that would be a huge troubleshooting step to see. You don't even need to sync anything up. Just run a 5-minute section through the Tink, run it through Domesday, see what happens. Please let me know if you have the chance to. But let's keep this conversation going because I want to have those videos out soon, and I want to get a lot of this stuff answered. Next up, the Remora has a RetroTink 5X plus a bunch of HDMI modded consoles. So essentially you're outputting 1080p, and they have a Datapath Vision E1. Do I think that would work well enough, or should they look at something else? And do I have any hardware recommendations for capturing the audio, since that has to be done separately? So as far as video quality goes, up to 1080p 60, the Datapath Vision E1 is going to be as good as any other solution out there or better. It could do raw uncompressed, provided your PC and your hard drive can handle it. Zero issues whatsoever there. The only thing that you would want is you would want the HDMI splitter, which you already have, by the way, because the Datapath Visions have that green speckle issue. You want some HDMI device between it. But for PS3 compatibility, you probably would have had something like that anyway for your capture card. So yes, that would absolutely work perfect. And if you have an HDMI splitter that has audio extraction, that would make things even easier, because then you could essentially just get any audio capture card that has some kind of optical audio input. There's a bunch of them out there. Sometimes you have to get a different interface that includes that feature on it, which is annoying to me, to be honest, but there's absolutely USB stuff out there that's fine for audio. Shouldn't be something you have to worry about for 2-channel. Maybe it gets a little weird for more than that, but that would be my recommendation. Of course, if you're going into the Tink 5X with analog, you could also just split that analog audio or put analog only into your PC's input. I still love the Motu M4. I use it for absolutely everything. It works great with MD4A. The YouTube channel Podcastage, awesome for different recommendations of stuff. I haven't spoken to them in years. I should probably just shoot out an email and say, hey, any cheap audio devices with SPDIF and coax inputs in there? But that's basically it. I think that solution is absolutely excellent. And the only other one I would recommend that I've used consistently for years is the LiveGamer 4K or the LiveGamer Bolt. The Bolt's kind of overpriced, so the LiveGamer 4K is probably what you're going to want to stick with. But if you don't need 4K, the other advantage of the LiveGamer is it's got the HDMI pass-through, and of course it does audio as well. So I would really just have a total overall look at your setup, but it sounds like you already have the stuff that you need to do basically everything. So the other thing that you could do is you could get a cheap, crappy HDMI capture card and use the second output of your HDMI splitter into that for audio. Just make sure that whatever cheap $20 CantLink thing that you can get off Amazon could do decent enough audio quality. That would certainly be another option, and depending on what you're looking to do, it might be totally fine. So let me know what you think. I could elaborate more on each of those things, but the Datapath Vision's an awesome card. Jason D has a Sinden light gun question. Funny, I quite literally just finished the live stream with Andy, so all this is fresh in my head. First, someone was asking about the dual screen setup for Time Crisis. They believe Time Crisis 2 was only released for PS2 and arcade, which is obviously not available on the Mister. The PS1 port of Time Crisis is only single player. But for other PS1 light gun games that do support 2-player, maybe it would work with 2 Sinden light guns. Now, I did ask Andy all of these things in the stream. If the PlayStation supports 2 light guns, each plugged into their own separate player 1, player 2 port, then that should work with the Sinden light gun, or 2 Sinden light guns plugged into the Mister, because they just show up as their own dedicated controller. If it's something weird like the Genesis and Super Nintendo versions of the Justifier, that pink gun plugs into the blue gun, so that would probably require some special code. So also, if the Mister was dual outputting to 2 TVs, would it be possible to play 2-player light gun games on 2 screens with 2 guns? Yes, except at the moment, the light gun border is not supported on the analog output side. So if you're talking about you want a 2-player game and you just want each player to, one person sit in front of a CRT and one person sit in front of an HDMI display, but it's still the same game. You're still playing it as if you were each sitting in front of the same HDMI TV. That should work once that support is added to the analog output. So great questions. And man, that like on the setup process is now ridiculously easy and it's working great. So this is going to be a big deal for Mr. fans. Next up, Lily Larceny just picked up a really nice low-use 36-inch Trinitron complete with original remote and manual. How's your back, Lily? I know what it's like to lift those around, even with a friend. The plastic housing looks brand new, and the picture looks amazing and crisp, except for some horizontal bowing. The service menu has adjustment for V-bow, but to adjust horizontal bow, it has some manual yoke adjustments inside the chassis. They watched a YouTube video of someone adjusting the yoke while the TV was on, which goes against everything they've heard about opening CRTs and safely discharging them. Are there proper safety guidelines or recommendations for serving a CRT while it's on, or is this person just taking major risks? Yes. There are proper procedures for that. There are ways to to try to move your hand in there without touching anything that could zap you, but you're always going to take a risk. So this is one of those things too, where I would research the exact bowing problem and see, because is this one of those things where there's 10 capacitors to swap out on your CRT that would help correct this anyway, so that if you go in and you change this, if you eventually do a recap, you'll have to change it back? Or is it just truly that, the CRT hasn't been used in a while and just needs calibration? And that's the type of stuff Steve knows a lot more than I do about. I know the concepts, and I certainly know what to look for, but Steve is really the expert and stuff like that. So my gut is telling me, see if you could check out and see if any capacitors could be replaced first. Because if you discharge the CRT, which you could definitely handle, Lily, no problem there. But if you discharge it and you replace a couple of caps, that should be fairly easy for you. But going in and messing with the yoke is weird, because if you bump it too far, a lot of bad things can happen, and it should all be fixable. But it's kind of like when I work on something that's just out of my comfort zone, I don't like doing it, because if I then break something, that's way out of my comfort zone. So that's where I like to kind of stop and phone a friend type of things, where if it's RGB modding an SNES Mini, if I slip and break a trace, I fix the trace. Like, I could do the mod and I could repair if I break the mod. But if I go too far to the point where I can't fix if I broke something, like when I recapped my 32-inch JVC-D series, I slipped and scraped a couple of traces, and Jose had to figure out which ones that I broke and fix them. So that's why I always just like to try to have realistic expectations. So I'm obviously not trying to put down any of your mod work. I'm just saying, don't be an idiot like me. Know your boundaries and figure out when you want to go a little bit farther or not. But for you, I would probably say just see if it's something you could fix with caps first. And if not, then go back and mess with the yoke. And, I would see if Steve has any videos on that as well, because it's scary the first time you do it. You're grabbing the neck of a CRT as all of this, as the hundreds of thousands of volts are blown through the back of it. It's, the first time you do something like that, it's weird, definitely. But if that's what you end up needing to do, I'm sure you could figure it out. But I would start with the slightly easier one first. Next up, Schmubby said, if they're understanding right, Twitch and OBS are experimenting with a new beta feature that allows streamers with an NVIDIA GPU to transcode their own quality options locally instead of Twitch doing it server-side. They don't fully understand how this is going to work, but it has them wondering if it would be possible to have slightly different layouts for upscaling retro games. So I don't know anything about this, and Epos Fox, the stream professor, would be the person whose YouTube channel you're going to want to watch for the real answers to this. So here's my guess, that I'm completely pulling out of thin air, that might be all wrong. But my guess is that using your NVIDIA GPU to transcode has to do with the compression, whereas you could already use OBS to do a true 240p integer scale already in whatever window, 1080p window, if you will. So you could do 240p to 5x 1080p, chop off the top and bottom, have it look perfect. But when you send it up to Twitch, there's two compressions. You're compressing it with OBS, and then Twitch and YouTube are compressing it as well. So if I'm guessing correctly, this beta feature means you're doing all of the transcoding on your PC, one compression, so that when you hit start recording in OBS, what you play back is exactly what Twitch would see as well. Now, there's obviously some constraints, because Twitch isn't going to let people do uncompressed streaming and stuff like that. So I think that's more for people who just want full control of how their streams look. And I think what you're saying is more on the lines of how you put your OBS settings to scale whatever your input signal is. So please correct me if I'm wrong. Anybody listening, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that's the basic answer to this. And I'm definitely going to be paying attention to Epos Vox's channel for when that's released, because I would love to see something like that on YouTube as well. Next up is a pizza-related question from Chris LaRoque. And I'm very sorry if I murdered the pronunciation of your last name. Not intentional. They have to know. Pepe's, Sally's, Modern, Bar, Colony, Roseland, something else. What's my favorite pizza? Pizza Med in Fairfield. The Southport Pizza, which if it's still there in Southport, it's the same owners, it's the same brothers. They're 4 brothers who moved here from Turkey. They do New Haven style pizza. I was one of their first customers when I was a kid. They're awesome humans. I moved away for years. I came back and I was like, well, I got to get a Pizza Med pizza. And I walked in and I heard, "Hey, Bobby!" I was like, "Holy crap, they remember me!" It was very heartwarming. That's definitely my favorite Connecticut pizza. New Haven style thin crust, the Quattro Formaggio, the 4 cheese pizza is good. It's very garlicky, so if you're not a fan of garlic, or if you have somebody you're going to be sitting next to the next day, maybe skip that one. But that's my favorite. Rico's is my second favorite, but Rico's has become hit or miss lately. There's a whole backstory with the head chef and where they came from and where they're going to. There's a whole drama about that. But when they get it right, when they make it like they used to, Rico's was definitely my other favorite. It's much thinner though. Like I could definitely fire down an entire Rico's pizza, and that's not even a Bob Fat joke. It's a, I couldn't sit down and eat a whole Pizza Med pizza. Let's just put it that way. So that's something to consider. I never liked Pepe's, which I know is blasphemous for anybody around here. I don't remember having Sally's, although I probably have. And I do remember having Bar and liking it, but I never thought like, oh, wow, I really got to go drive and park and figure out how to get another pizza from them. I just remember thinking, oh, this is a really good pizza. So yeah, that's if anybody's around, those are my personal favorites, but it's all preference. It is a perfectly good answer if you live around here and you're like, I don't like any of those pizzas. That's fine. It's all preference. That's what I like. But if you haven't had Pizza Med, I definitely give that one a try. And there, you can sit down and eat there, but it's more of a takeout place and everything. And if you're a pizza fan, then you already know you don't expect fancy restaurants when you go for New Haven style Connecticut pizza. They're just pizza joints essentially, but it's good. Funny, as I'm talking about this, I could smell the smell of Pizza Med. Anybody have those memories from your childhood where like something really sticks? But as I'm picturing them, as I'm picturing the brothers and picturing being in there waiting for a pizza to be delivered, I could actually smell what the pizza smells like. So thanks, Chris. Now I'm going to have to go get one of those. Next up, a couple questions from Jason Guffey. First, they're having a problem with their downscaling HDMI splitters, the ones that could do 4K to 1080p. And Jason went through the setup just to verify everything seems to be connected correctly, but they said they now have 3 deadweight 4K to 1080p downscalers. Any ideas? So I just want to confirm, these were things that worked at one point for you and then just died on you, right? If that's the case, unfortunately, that's what you get with a $20 splitter. That's why I often refer to these things as tools in your toolbox, stuff like that. And, some people get really upset. Hey, I bought this on your recommendation and it died. How dare you? But if you want the good one, if you want one that's not one of the cheap manufactured ones, you're going to have to spend like $150 or more. So from that perspective, you could buy one of these a year and still be, cheaper than buying one of those other ones every 5 years. So it's really up to you. But if this is something that's super important to you, you should definitely look into like HD Fury stuff, or there's a German brand that worked very well. Those are not PS3 compatible though, by the way. But yeah, unfortunately, it's just the way it goes. I probably bought 20 over the years, and one died in like 3 months. And the rest are still working. So yeah, it's the roll of the dice, right? You could buy 10 of them and 9 might die. And you could buy 10 or all of them are still working 5 years later. It's the unfortunate side effect of buying these cheap kind of clone style products. Next question. They have a friend who just acquired all the pieces of a Super Scope setup, but when they're testing it, the receiver doesn't seem to detect that any buttons were being pressed on the scope itself. Is there any way you could verify whether the scope or receiver are still functional? Do you have it plugged into a controller extension cable? Because that's a problem I ran into. I am not even close to an expert on the Super Scope, but I do very distinctly remember getting one when I still lived in Stanford, plugging it into my setup, and nothing happened. I went, all right, well, let me try plugging the receiver directly into it. And that worked fine. So if you have an extension cable plugged in, try that. If not, I'm really not sure. Does anybody else have any suggestions other than find somebody else with a fully working Super Scope setup and try to swap the pieces out? Sorry, I can't be much of a help there. Third, they have a Sony Vegas CRT that works fine to their knowledge, and they're using a recommended HDMI to comp converter from Amazon, but they're getting a zigzag sine wave pattern going back and forth across their video. So can you verify this converter with anything else other than a CRT? Can you plug this converter into a capture card or a RetroTink or an OSSC and see what's happening? If it's not working through something that like an OSSC or a RetroTink, then you probably have a bad HDMI to component video converter. And the problem is you don't know which ones, or not you, like you can't find out which ones are the good ones these days. It used to be that if you bought 10 of them, 9 would work fine with 240p and 1 wouldn't. And these days you buy 10 of them and 8 don't work and 2 do. And even somebody recommended one off of AliExpress, and I got it on their recommendation. I sadly still even haven't had time to plug it in, and I probably won't for at least another week. But the person who recommended it bought it and it worked perfect. So somebody else asked me and I said, hey, buy this at your own risk. They bought it and it didn't. So I'm interested to see if I just have another paperweight here as well. But yeah, it stinks. We really need somebody in the community to build these for us with all of this stuff in mind. But it's not going to be $12 from AliExpress. It's going to be $100 or something, because that's just what it costs to make things the right way in low quantities. So kind of stinks, but try that first. Double check, make sure, and see what happens on like an OSSC, and then go back to your CRT. Lastly, what do I recommend for 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray players? For those recommendations, I always have, do you have existing equipment? Do you have a game console that could play it? Beautiful. Just use that. You're good to go. You already own it. If not, then I would either find the cheapest possible thing that you could find, or I would go and look into something really nice. Like I still, some of my friends make fun of me because I still love this thing, but my Oppo UHD Blu-ray player does source direct. It scales very well for what it is. It's got a bunch of very cool audio options as well. And it's what I trust to play back my discs, but it's very expensive. If you want to hack it for ISO support, it's a pain. You got to buy special cables, and then you have to pay a software hacker to send you a file. It's a pain, but how important is this to you? Like, do you have a calibrated OLED TV and a really nice surround sound system, and you love playing your discs? Or do you have something where you're like, hey, I rip all my discs to my hard drive, I play them through whatever method, but I still really like to have the ability to play those now and then. If that's the case, grab the cheapest thing you could find or use a video game console, and you should be totally fine. There's some limitations of the game consoles and disc playback, but for the purpose of like, hey, I just sometimes want to play the disc instead of the rip, I think you should be fine. Next up, Josh Lopez recently got an older piece of analog video editing gear, and after one use, it just stopped working. So they checked the power supply and found that their power supply that was labeled 9 volts was actually outputting 12 volts. So both the power adapter and the device itself are rated for 9 volt 1 amp. So do I think they might have blown out their new piece of precious gear? It's possible. However, check for a fuse, check for any components around the power input. Sniff test is always a good one for this. Do you smell one of the components burnt, which days later, probably not, but maybe, who knows? This could have been one of those things where your power supply went bad, started out putting too many volts or something like that, and you fried it. But hopefully there's a fuse, or maybe you just popped a circuit or something where you could replace it. But yeah, I'm not an expert at tracing down power issues, but I've absolutely done stuff like that before. And a lot of people have done it with the OSSC, so there's already procedures to go in and replace certain components when you blow those out. But yeah, you're going to have to really dig in for this one. And hopefully you'll get lucky and find some kind of fuse or just one blown chip or something like that. And bonus question, they know I'm a big metal fan and was wondering if I ever got into any thrash or punk stuff. I was never the biggest punk fan. There's certainly a bunch of songs I liked. I could probably name off a ton of punk songs that I really liked, but it's not usually my go-to. But thrash, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reason I play guitar is because of Dave Mustaine, who was a thrash king right there. I mean, I remember, it's a stupid but true story. I remember always loving music and wanting to be a singer because it's what kids who don't know about instruments want. Then I saw Slash stand up on the piano for the November Rain solo, and I was like, I think maybe I want to be a guitarist. Until I heard the Rust in Peace album. I mean, just the opening notes, right? by the time I got to Tornado of Souls, I was like, I don't want to play guitar. I need to play guitar. That stuff is in my blood. It still is. That's why I still love bands like In Flames, and there's even some modern bands still killing it. If, the weirdest and coolest I've heard in a while is, I think it's Ronald from Falling in Reverse. What an insane song. Just a mashup of different metal genres and more. I don't even want to spoil it. I was just blown away at how cool that song was. So yes, love all of that stuff. I really love all kinds of music, but that type of thrash, the In Flames style metal, the melodic death metal stuff. That's just me. It's just who I am. I can't control that. That's like, it fits perfectly in my crazy ADHD OCD brain. That stuff starts playing and like I'm at peace, or I get really excited and happy. Either one, but. Yeah. Do you have any recommendations for newer thrash stuff that I might like, you think? Next up, Mr. Morrow has an Extron Crosspoint, a RetroTink 4K, and a RetroTink 5X that they all use simultaneously. For S-Video, they route Y into green and C into red for enhanced video from the Tink 4K, but that prevents them from consolidating S-Video on the Tink 5X because chroma goes into the blue RCA port on the Tink 5X. Do I have any Crosspoint trickery I could recommend to get chroma into blue on the Tink 5X so they could eliminate the S-Video cable? Yes, Loopback, which would require you to have a bunch of extra ports on the Crosspoint, but you could go from input 1 to output 1 into input 2 to output 2. So by doing it that way, you could swap the cables on whatever extra input you have. It's very hard to visualize. For my crazy brain, it's hard to visualize. It's easier with the drawing or if you're actually just connecting it. But you would essentially be taking your standard S-Video output for the Tink 4K, and then when you route it out of one of the standard outputs, you would just swap the cables to their corresponding inputs. So, and to set this on the Crosspoint is so easy, it confused me. Shank had to explain it like 5 times. And it wasn't until I actually did it. I think Shank and Fudo had to explain it to me a bunch of times. But in that scenario, you would literally go button 1 in, or input 1, output 1. Then you'd wait for him to blink, and then you'd go input 2 to whatever output the Tink 5X is. And that's it. And both are still active at the same time. And it wouldn't reverse it until you access the same thing twice. So once again, it's probably hard to visualize if you're like me. Even though I just explained it, you have to actually push the buttons and do it before you go, oh crap, it really is that easy. So thank you to my friends for being patient with me for trying to explain that. But yeah, that should be what you need. Give it a try and let me know what you think. Next up, DW623 is doing the opposite kind of move that I did. They're moving from a rural area to a city and wanted to ask about using 2.4 gigahertz wireless controllers. They remember me saying that being in cities can cause interference with that specific kind of wireless connection, in Bluetooth as well, by the way. And they're moving to Chicago, so not as population dense as New York City. I ran into those issues in Stamford, Connecticut, though, which is not nearly as big as Chicago, so you're still going to run into that. It's not going to be a high rise around those buildings, just something like a 3-floor condo complex with similar buildings around. Is that dense enough to cause issues? But when should you really worry about 2.4 gigahertz in cities, and how could they tell if there are issues? So there's 2 things that you're going to run into. The first is distance, which should be less of an issue. You should be able to sit on a normal distance in front of your TV and not have a problem. If you have a couch that's super far away from your TV, you might have to buy a beanbag chair and sit closer or something like that, or get wired in an extension cable. Then the interference could also cause slowdowns. With Wi-Fi internet, that's a big deal because you drop some serious speeds. But what about latency on wireless controllers? And here's where my answer is disgusting, and I hate that this is my answer. You got to just try it and see. Or I guess you could also buy one of those Mr. Test kits, or even the Windows-based ones, and you could test that to see. Now, the Mr. kits get you down to the millisecond to microsecond of accuracy. The Windows-based ones don't account for the Windows latency as well, so you would have to do a baseline test first. And what I mean by that, while you're still in the burbs, run the Windows-based test, write down what the number is. If the number is 12 milliseconds, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're running at 12 milliseconds of latency. It could only be 4 and the rest is your Windows rig, but point is, then you move to the city, you run the same test. is it still at the same number? Or if it's much more, that's the latency added for all of the interference that's around you. But those are pains. It's a pain in the butt. You got to take apart your controller, you got to solder a wire to it, you got to buy a bunch of extra equipment. So you could just play it and see what happens. For me personally, if the lag is horrendous, I notice immediately. But if the lag is just bad, but not so bad, it takes me a while. I get into a game and then all of a sudden I start to realize, wait, what's different? Why? Oh, wait, did I forget to put my TV into game mode? That's happened a lot, by the way. I'll start playing Super Metroid and I'm running through in a place with not many enemies. I'm like, oh, this is neat. And then all of a sudden I get to a part where there's a specific jump or enemies and I'm like, why am I sucking at this game? Oh, yeah, all right, that's what it is. Whereas if it's really bad, right away. So I hate telling people to guess, but it's the cheapest solution. So unless you're a nerd like me that really wants to go through and always test stuff because, I would go with just try it first. And you could always do something like get a USB controller and an extension cable if you need to, and then use your wireless controllers, then switch to the wired, or I guess USB doesn't have to be, if you're using an original console, just original controller, switch over to the wired after like 20 minutes of gameplay or 15 minutes. And if you were like, oh, this is a noticeable difference, sadly, that's your answer. But if you're like, feels about the same, you should be good. Just try it with a game where lag matters, obviously. If you're playing Pokemon, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. Next up, Sean McFarland wants to know what LCD monitor they should get specifically to run the Mr. cores for DOS, Commodore 64, Amiga, and Apple IIe. So I think, and I'm going by memory here, so please, people in the comments, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's a ton of DOS stuff that runs at 72 frames per second, not 60. So you would want any LCD panel that can do that. So essentially, any LCD monitor that could do 72, 90, 120. Most likely you're probably going to find ones that could do 120 hertz. And then everything else is kind of just whatever after that. So that would be my go-to because you're going to get some screen tearing and some other stuff if the games that you're trying to play are supposed to be running at 72 and everything else is running at 60. Now, my numbers might not be correct. Maybe it's 75, 76. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure the theory of needing an LCD monitor that can go faster than 60 hertz in order to properly do this is true. Once again, please flame me in the comments. Let me know I'm a moron and I should stop and look this stuff up. But I'm pretty sure that's the answer if you really want accurate emulation for this stuff. And I don't know if those iPad screens can do more than 60 frames per second, although they are like really fun little monitors to game on. So I don't know. You might want to look into that, but I would just suggest doing that and then setting any kind of custom settings to match that DOS output. You might even need to do something like direct video mode and find something that could accept that and scale. But is there anybody out there in the Mr. community that's done this before that can confirm I'm giving Sean correct advice, or if I'm just being a talking head moron and I should have just said, I don't know. I feel like I got this one right, but please let me know in the comments. Next up, Kirk found an internal Bluetooth mod for the Dreamcast on AliExpress, but they want to make sure that they're not buying a clone product or they're not supporting a clone company. And I took a look at the listing and it specifically says this is not Blue Retro. Don't flash this with Blue Retro firmware. So I don't know if that means this is a company that's designed this from scratch on their own, or if this is somebody who cloned the Blue Retro, which is open source, but cloned it, changed it around, and pretended it was their own, which is not okay with the licenses there. And there's obviously no credit for Darth Cloud or anything like that. But it's really hard because Bitfunks has created about 20 different company names and a bunch of different logos, and they sell through many different places. So I see something like this, and I'm like, that's probably from Bitfunks, ignore it. But how crappy is that if there's somebody who just happens to be an AliExpress seller that made this from scratch and wrote their own Bluetooth protocol, and that's how we treat them? So I just don't know how to approach this one. I always approach this stuff with caution, equally on eBay and on Amazon. It's not an AliExpress thing, but I see stuff like this where Nobody in the community has been talking about it. They're not popping up having conversations with people. So is it a clone or is it just somebody doing stuff on their own? And it's really hard to tell sometimes. And that's why I get so defensive of Ivory from Retro Castle, because I know that he's doing all of his own work. Obviously, the Mr. stuff's open source, but I mean, he talks about that. He doesn't pretend that he's, that everything was his own. He took Sorg's designs, he put his own DACs in there. And I get really upset when people are like, oh, that's just a clone company on AliExpress. No, he's absolutely not. But how would you know that if you didn't know him and he didn't know other people in the community that were using his products? So I just don't know what to say right now, because I would feel beyond awful if this was just a good dev that no one I know has met yet. But I think I'd also feel pretty awful if this turned out to be a clone company, even if it was their own design. It's rough with AliExpress, eBay, and Amazon. So I'm going to very cautiously say I got no clue, Kirk. I'm really sorry to kind of be useless about this one. But does anybody know if the iBlue control mod Sega DC Bluetooth wireless controller adapter is a clone or if it's actually somebody's design? Let me know what you think. Well, that's it for this time. If you're new to these Q&As, please post any question you have wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post. The way the services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you see here, I really like just scrolling through in real time and kind of having a conversation as if we were hanging out somewhere. Sometimes that means I remember stuff wrong, which I always try to be honest about that, but I really prefer this format for the Q&As. I really want you all to feel like we're all just chilling somewhere together. So any question you want, fire away. And as always, thanks to everybody who supports in absolutely any way, because it really is you who's keeping all this going. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week.